All right, hi guys, here we go. So for this week, we have one worksheet. That's it. But we're going to do one day, we're going to do it in one particular method, and the next time we're going to do it a different method. So what we have here is a bunch of square roots or radicals. Radical is just that little symbol that we call a square root symbol. In this case, right up above the 75 there. That's the radical. And if they don't put a little number over in this area here, then we're assuming it's a square root. So what we're going to do today for day one is we are going to estimate these to the nearest tenth. Now there's a couple of different ways we can go about doing that. So first off, I want to go over to number 2 because this is an easy one. The square root of 16 is just 4, so we would just write 4 and be done with that one. Okay, but if we go back to 75 over here, the square root of 75 is not going to give us a whole number, so it says that when we are going to take the square root of something that's not a whole number, we want to estimate its value to the nearest tenth. So real important for both of these days is that you know your square numbers. So I have the first 25 or so square numbers memorized, and that would be a great idea for you to do at some point in your life, but most people will never do that. So I just like to make a little list of square numbers, or numbers that I know the square root of right off the bat to make it easy for me, and then I can refer back to this each time I'm doing one of these problems. So square root of 1 we don't really need because it won't help us simplify anything, but it's nice to know the square root of 1 is 1. Then the square root of 4 is 2. The square root of 9 is 3. The square root of 16 is 4. Square root of 25 is 5. Square root of 36 is 6. Square root of 49 is 7. Square root of 64 is 8. The square root of 81 is 9. Square root of 100 is 10. Square root of 121 is 11. Square root of 144 is 12. Square root of 169 is 13. Square root of 196 is 14. Square root of 225 is 15, and that should be good enough for us for today. But this is a list that we can refer back to as we go through and simplify these. We're going to use this today to help us estimate square roots. So first thing you want to do when you look at the square root of 75 is see where this would fall on this list. So if you look here, you see that you've got the square root of 64 and the square root of 81. So the square root of 75 is somewhere in between that. Let me change my color here. Let's see. I'm not very good at this. Okay, let's go with purple. All right, so square root of 75 is somewhere between the square root of 64 and the square root of 81. The square root of 64 is 8. The square root of 81 is 9. These are a couple of square root values that we know. So when we look at the square root of 75, how far away from 64 is it? Well, 75 minus 64 is 11. So it's 11 away from this one. And then 81 minus 75 is 6. So it's closer to 81 than it is to 64, which means that the square root of 75 is going to be closer to 9 than 8. So when we go back and do the square root of 75 here, go back to the top of the worksheet here, we're going to estimate it to be somewhere in between 8 and 9. So we're going to call 8.9. And then since it was closer to, it was only 6 away from 81, and it was 11 away from 64, meant it was closer to, it's going to be closer to 9 than it is to 8. So our estimate is going to be closer to that. So I'd go with like 8.7 or 8.8, something like that. I'm going to go ahead and go with 8.7. And if you are able to estimate that, if you just get on the correct side of 0.5, I'm going to call it good. And so that would be an okay estimate. And when you're showing your work on this, I'd like to see which two you chose to go between. So between the square root of 64 being 8 and the square root of 81 being 9, I'd like you to write that down on your work there, and then you can show why you chose about 8.7 to be your answer. So that's one way to go about estimating its value. So I'm going to go over another way to estimate the value of the square root that's going to be a little more precise than that. And so let's see here, with square root of 36, that should be an easy one. That is going to be 6. Okay, and then the square root of 80. Okay, so here's our next one that we're going to try and estimate. Well, no, actually 80, that's so close to 81, that's going to be like 8.9. So let's go with square root of 8. This will be a good one for us to figure out. Now, which two square root numbers that we know is this in between? This is going to be in between the square root of 4, which is 2, and the square root of 9, which is 3. So it's going to be 2 point something. We'll figure out what it is here in just a second. So another way to do this is to go, okay, well, the square root of 8 is, okay, so it is 4 away from 4, and it is 1 away from 9. So and the difference there is going to be between 9 and 4 is 5. So we're going to use that to help us estimate our decimal value. So since from 9 to 4 there's a difference of 5, we're going to take that as our denominator. And since 8 is 4 away from the lower value, okay, we're going to use that as our numerator. So we're essentially saying that the value of the square root of 8 is about 2 4/5. This is not exact. This is still an estimate because you can't actually make square root numbers into fractions. This is still just an estimate. Help us figure it out. So then what we'll do is we'll convert 4/5 into a decimal. Some of you might already know that that's 0.8, but most of the time you're going to actually have to divide it out, where you do 4 divided by 5, and you go, okay, 5 goes into 40 8 times, and you subtract no remainder, so we go there. So we're going to estimate 2.8 for our value for the square root of 8. So about 2.8. That's another way to estimate to the nearest tenth there. Now, if we went ahead and did that on a calculator, let's see, how close would we come to the square root of 8 is actually 2.828427. So our estimate of 2.8 is really close to the actual calculated value on your calculator. So that's day 1. I will post day 2 on what we're going to do with some of these on Wednesday.